Portal. In this lab, we will approach the Azure Portal as an entry-level Azure user. We'll access the Azure Portal using the lab-provided credentials, and then we'll complete some lab tasks to familiarize ourselves with the UI components in the Azure Portal, because knowing how to navigate the Azure Portal will help us to understand how to use the portal and some of the convenient built-in components. To start, we'll review the top menu, and we'll see some of the functionalities provided by the top menu, such as quick search, the ability to view event notifications, an easy way to access the Cloud Shell, and access to the settings for our Azure Portal. Then we'll review the Hub menu, where we can take a look at dashboards, easily return to the home page of the Azure Portal, look at resources by category, review cost management, and have access to other support-related features with Azure. We will then review dashboards and how resources can be pinned to the dashboard, and then see how we can manage sharing or making dashboards private. We will also look at how we can customize the panel of our dashboard so we can visualize data on our dashboards exactly the way we want. So now that we know what steps we'll cover in this lab activity, real fast, let's take a look at a diagram of the Azure Portal to familiarize ourselves with the different sections and UI components of the Azure Portal. The area highlighted in orange is the top menu, which gives us access to several tools and settings to help manage resources and our portal settings. The area highlighted in purple is our Hub menu, which gives us a quick way to access different dashboards, services, tools for monitoring and cost management, and so much more. And highlighted in green, we have the dashboard, where we can view data and information about our resources and various services. Let's make our way over into the Azure Portal, and when you're ready to move on to the next video, we'll go ahead and walk through the steps for this lab in the Azure Portal. Hello Gurus! Welcome to the solution video for this hands-on lab accessing and using the Azure Portal. First things first, if we're going to become an Azure Master, we have to understand how to navigate our way around the Azure Portal. And that's what we're going to be doing in this solution video. Let's first get logged into the Azure Portal using the credentials provided in the lab interface page. Grab the username and password, then open up the Azure Portal by right-clicking on the blue Open Link in Incognitos window button, and let's open that up in incognito mode. Paste in your credentials for your user, and you'll be able to authenticate into the Azure Portal. Again, these credentials are provided in the lab interface. We'll be asked if we want to stay signed in, and I'll select yes, just in case we get logged out. Then we'll be authenticated into the Azure Portal's homepage. Now, if for any reason you see pop-ups, make sure to close those down. Or if you're brought into the resource group page, you can click on Home here, or in the Hamburger or Hub menu. This will take us to the home of the Azure Portal. That way we are all starting off from the same place within the Azure Portal. As we go through the solution video, we're going to be discussing things such as the Hamburger or Hub menu, the quick search bar here, the Cloud Shell, and how we can use it to do things inside of Azure that we can also do in the Azure Portal. Then we'll also discuss things such as notifications in the activity log, as well as the portal settings that we can set for the Azure Portal. So let's go back to the home page and get started by first talking about the quick search bar. Here in the quick search bar, we can do things such as search up different services or things in the documentation inside of Azure. For example, if we were to type in virtual machines here, what we would see are our virtual machine related compute services, as well as any resources we have inside of Azure that are of a virtual machine service type. And then on top of that, we'll also see marketplace items, as well as documentation, virtual machine resources on our account, or resource groups that match our search string. So here we can go into virtual machines, and we'll see that we have our lab VM virtual machine under the virtual machine service. Now what we can do here is go into the virtual machine and make any changes that we might need to do with the virtual machine, such as configuration updates with the networking, and also connecting into the virtual machine. All of this is possible through the quick search bar here. The next component of the Azure Portal we're going to discuss here is the Cloud Shell. And the Cloud Shell allows us to be able to use Bash or PowerShell so that we can use a Cloud Shell environment to run PowerShell and Azure CLI commands inside of the Azure Portal without having to download the Azure CLI or Azure Resource Manager commandlets for PowerShell on our systems locally. We can run all this by configuring the Azure Cloud Shell with a storage account, and we'll be able to run those commands in Bash or in a Powershell environment. Let's go ahead and exit Cloud Shell by exiting out of here. The next bit we're going to take a look at here is the activity log. We'll see notifications here pop up as we do things in the Azure portal, such as creating resources, any updates to resources, or if we have a deployment running, we'll see that here in our activity log. Then the final component of the top menu we're going to discuss here before we move on to the hamburger or hub menu is the settings section. Here in the portal settings, we can do things such as move between directories and subscriptions. We see here we have the lab subscription we are currently using for this lab activity. We can also do things such as change the appearance and startup views of the Azure portal. For example, we could change the menu behavior to dock instead of flyout. We could also change the theme of Azure from the Azure blue to regular blue, light, or dark. We can also choose to put the view in a high contrast, white or black, and set different startup views such as either the home dashboard we saw or dashboards we have created. We can change the language and regional format of our portal view, and we will also see things such as our information and sign-out notifications. For example, we could choose to sign me out never, and we can also enable pop-up notifications inside of the Azure portal and disable them as well. Now what we're going to do is head over to the Hamburger Hub menu and talk about this as our final component in the Azure portal. When you open up the Hub menu, you'll have access to do various things such as create resources, go to the home of our Azure portal, as we've seen, easily access all the services available to us from Azure, and we can also favorite our most used and relevant services and tools, and that will show up under the favorite section in the Hub menu. The last item we're going to discuss here are dashboards. We can see we have a dashboard here, and it's a private dashboard. And what we're going to do is update the view of this dashboard as a place to be able to view what's going on and get information really quickly about things inside of our environment, such as our resources. We'll click into this lab VM here, and we'll go over to the monitoring tab for our VM. And let's say we want to see the CPU average for this machine on our dashboard without having to navigate all the way to this monitoring tab. Well, if we mouse over to the CPU metrics, we can click on this pin tab here. We'll be asked if we want to pin the CPU metrics into an existing board or create a new one. Let's go ahead and pin this to our existing private dashboard called My Dashboard. We'll click Pin, and now it's pinned here in this dashboard. We can see the CPU metric window here at the bottom of our dashboard view, and we can also edit this dashboard and customize our view so we can visualize and display data the way we want. Let's see this firsthand by clicking on Edit in our dashboard here. And I'm going to resize the CPU metric window that we just pinned to a 3x3 block so it takes up less real estate on our dashboard view. To do this, grab the bottom corner of the CPU metric window and drag it to the size you want. Once we're happy with our changes, we'll go ahead and hit save, and now we can see our dashboard is updated. We can also export, clone, and share this dashboard with others to provide collaboration between our teams. Alright gurus, that's everything for now. Thank you so much for joining me in this solution video where we learned how to access and use the Azure portal. I wish you the best of luck in your continued studies and keep being awesome, gurus. Hi, my name is Brian Donas, and welcome to this Create and Assume Roles in AWS Hands-On Lab. In this lab, we're going to create Amazon IAM policies and roles to restrict access to AWS resources. We'll begin with an AWS account with some IAM users and groups that I have defined for you already. We have the admin group with users admin1, admin2, and admin3. Then we have the developer group with users dev1, dev2, and dev3. Both will have an S3 admin policy attached, giving them full access to 4 S3 buckets. In this scenario, your company is running an application in AWS and utilizing S3 buckets to store user application configuration data, as well as customer data. You have identified the developers currently have too much access, and you need to adjust permissions for compliance and security reasons. You'll be tasked with removing the developer group access to the S3 administrator policy, and you will create restricted policies and roles that provide access to only the app config buckets. You'll test the policies applied to a user. You'll also test assuming a role using STS, which can execute the same restricted policy, and you will verify those permissions are working correctly with another user. When you're ready, hi, my name is Brian Donas, and welcome to this Create and Assume.
Hey, and welcome, Gurus, to this hands-on lab accessing and using the Azure Cloud Shell. I'm Chase, and in this hands-on lab, we'll approach the Azure Cloud Shell from the perspective of an entry-level Azure user. We'll access and use the Cloud Shell, and in order to do so, we need to complete a couple of lab steps. The first of which is creating a storage account in FileShare so that we can configure our Cloud Shell. Now, a storage account has to be of a unique name, lowercase letters and numbers only, and it has to be 3 to 24 characters in length. And then we have to have a file share inside of that storage account. And once we've created both of those, we can configure our Cloud Shell and access the Cloud Shell from the Azure Portal. We then will use Powershell and Azure CLI commands in the Cloud Shell, and the commands that we will run will be as follows: az group list, az storage account list, az VM list, az VM create as our Azure CLI commands, and our Powershell commands will be get az resource group, get az storage account, get az VM, get az resource, and remove az VM. Now that we're familiar with the steps that we'll take in this lab to access and use the Cloud Shell and what commands we will be running when using the Cloud Shell, let's make our way over to the Azure Portal and pick up in the next video with our hands-on lab. Alright, Gurus, so here we are inside of the Azure Portal, and we got logged in using the lab-provided credentials. Now what we need to do is access and use the Azure Cloud Shell from inside the Azure Portal. And we can do so by clicking here on the Cloud Shell icon in the top menu. And if we haven't provisioned our Azure Cloud Shell, we'll see this here. We have to choose between a Bash or PowerShell environment for our Cloud Shell. We'll go ahead and select PowerShell here. And this is because we're going to use Azure CLI and PowerShell commands in this lab, so this can be done from inside a PowerShell environment, whereas in the Bash environment, we could only run the Azure CLI commands unless we started a PowerShell inside of our Bash environment. So now it says here we have no storage mounted, and this is because we need to create our storage account and file share for our Cloud Shell. So we'll click on Show Advanced Settings here, and then we'll create new for our storage account, and we'll go ahead and name this something unique, lowercase and numbers only, with 3 to 24 characters. So I'll name mine Cloud Chase Demo Shell Lab, and then we'll create our file share from new, and we'll name it Cloud Shell, and we'll click Create Storage, and this is going to create our storage account and our file share and configure it for our Cloud Shell so that we can begin to use it. So as soon as this is done provisioning and configuring for our Cloud Shell, I'll be back so that we can start using commands from the Azure CLI and PowerShell in there and configure it for our Cloud Shell. So we'll click on Show Advanced Settings here, and then we'll create new for our storage account, and we'll go ahead and name this something unique, lowercase and numbers only, with 3 to 24 characters. So I'll name mine Cloud Chase Demo Shell Lab, and then we'll create our file share from new, and we'll name it Cloud Shell, and we'll click Create Storage, and this is going to create our storage account and our file share and configure it for our Cloud Shell so that we can begin to use it. So as soon as this is done provisioning and configuring for our Cloud Shell, I'll be back so that we can start using commands from the Azure CLI and PowerShell inside of the Cloud Shell. All right, gurus, so our Cloud Shell has finished provisioning and the configuration with our storage account and file share are complete. So let's maximize our Cloud Shell here by clicking the Maximize button, and we'll clear up our Cloud Shell by typing in clear, hit enter. So now that we've maximized our Cloud Shell and cleared our Cloud Shell here by clicking the Maximize button and the configuration with our storage account and file share are complete. So let's maximize our Cloud Shell here by clicking the Maximize button, and we'll clear up our Cloud Shell by typing in clear, hit enter. So now that we've maximized our Cloud Shell and cleared up our display for the best viewing, we are going to take a look at some of the different features that we have within the Cloud Shell that'll help us use it. Inside of the Cloud Shell, we can move back and forth between environments. We selected a PowerShell environment, but we can move into a Bash Shell environment for the Cloud Shell just by selecting it here, and alternatively, we can move back to PowerShell by selecting it here in the drop-down as well. We can also restart our Cloud Shell by clicking on this restart icon here. We can get help information such as the Cloud Shell overview, Azure Powershell command reference, and some documentation on how to copy and paste from the Cloud Shell here. We also can take a look at our settings, and from here we can modify our text size from small, medium, or large and see that it expands the text size for us. And then we also can modify our font for our text in the Cloud Shell. So let's return this back to medium, and here we have the ability to upload and download files from the Cloud Shell, and then here we can open new sessions in our Cloud Shell. And then we also have access to open a in Cloud Shell editor to edit files. And then we also have the ability to web preview in the Cloud Shell. So now that we've gone over some of those key features for the Cloud Shell, we're ready to get started. We'll start by running some Azure CLI commands like we talked about. We're going to start with AZ group list. And this command is going to output a list of the resource groups that we have here, and we only have one inside of this lab environment. Now that we have that, we have our name, and we'll go ahead and grab this because we're going to need this here in just a moment, and we'll copy this, and then we'll clear up, and now we're going to run AZ storage account list, and similarly this is going to list out the storage accounts that we have here inside of our lab environment, which is the one that we created. And now we're going to run AZ storage here in just a group list, and this command is to web preview in the Cloud Shell. So now that we've gone over some of those key features for the Cloud Shell, we're ready to get started. We'll start by running some Azure CLI commands like we talked about. We're going to start with AZ group list, and this command is going to output a list of the resource groups that we have here, and we only have one inside of this lab environment. Now that we have that, we have our name, and we'll go ahead and grab this because we're going to need this here in just a moment, and we'll copy this, and then we'll clear up. And now we're going to run az storage account list, and similarly, this is going to list out the storage accounts that we have here inside of our lab environment, which is the one that we created when we created the Cloud Shell, the Cloud Chase Demo Shell Lab, or whatever you named it, whenever you named it something unique. So let's go ahead and clear up our display here, and then we'll type in az VM list, and we're going to get a blank array here because we don't have any virtual machines created inside of this lab environment, but we can create one real fast by using az VM create, and we'll use backticks to jump down to the next line to make this command more readable, and we'll provide the name for our VM. We're going to name this lab VM, and then use another backtick to jump down to the next line for another parameter. We're going to give it the resource group name, and we'll paste that in. That's why we copied it just a second ago. And we'll type another backtick to jump to the next line. We'll give it an image of Ubuntu LTS and backtick down to the next line. And we'll give it our admin username, and we're going to use Azure user and backtick down to the next line. This virtual machine and metadata about this finished provisioning, and we can tell because we have some output here letting us know that verify that virtual machine now exists inside of our lab environment. So we'll be back whenever that virtual machine has finished provisioning. Alright, Guru, so we're back and our virtual machine has finished provisioning, and we can tell because we have some output here letting us know that it's finished. As well, we've been provided our ID for our virtual machine and a private and public IP address, as well as other metadata about this virtual machine. Now, we can run that az VM list command again to validate the existence of this virtual machine, and there it is. Now our command is giving us some output and letting us know that we have this virtual machine. Now that we've done that, we're going to move into our Powershell commands for location because the cloud informant about the virtual machine. So let's clear up our display real fast. And I just want to remind us that the keys that we've generated for this virtual machine are in a ephemeral storage right now because the Cloud Shell, if it were to be deprovisioned, will not store these keys for us. So we need to back these keys up to a permanent storage location. So just keep that in mind when creating virtual machines and saving those generated SSH keys. Now that we've done that, we're going to move into our PowerShell commands for this lab, and we're going to get our AZ resource group. So we'll type in get AZ resource, and we can tab complete this command to provide the rest of the output. And if we didn't finish typing all of it and we hit tab right here, it would provide some suggestions for us in PowerShell. It's one of the things that makes it a really cool tool. And we'll go ahead and run enter on get AZ resource group, and it's going to output information for our resource group that we have here, and we only have one in this lab environment. Next, we're going to clear up, and we're going to get our storage account by typing in get AZ storage account, and we'll hit enter, and it will list out our storage account that we have that we created for the Cloud Shell. Next, we're going to get our virtual machine. We'll clear up, and we'll type in get AZ VM and hit enter, and it's going to output information to us about our virtual machine that we've created. Now let's get AZ resource, and we're going to pipe this PowerShell command to FT to format this output for us to get information on all the resources we have here, such as the virtual machine and the other resources created when creating the virtual machine, like the network interface and public IP address or virtual network and storage account, because we can see all this information here under resource type. Now, let's go ahead and clear up, because what we're going to do now is remove our virtual machine. We're going to type in remove AZ VM, and then we'll provide the name, and the name was lab VM, and then we're going to give our resource group name, and we can go ahead and paste the source. The name was lab remove AZ VM. Now let's go ahead. We can see all this information here under resource type. Now let's go ahead and clear up, because what we're going to do now is remove our virtual machine. We're going to type in remove AZ VM, and then we'll provide the name, and the name was lab VM, and then we're going to give our resource group name, and we can go ahead and paste that in because we still have it saved to our clipboard, and we'll hit enter, and we'll hit yes, and this is going to remove that virtual machine from our resource group for us. So we'll be back as soon as that's complete. Alright gurus, we're back and our command has finished, and so we have some interesting information here, such as our operation ID and the status of the operation of deleting our virtual machine, which was successful, and the start and end time of this operation. Now let's clear up and validate using the PowerShell that we don't have a virtual machine anymore by typing in get AZVM, hit enter, and we should get nothing back, and we do, because we've removed this virtual machine and that operation was successful. So this wraps up our hands-on lab, and I had a great time in this hands-on lab accessing and using the Cloud Shell. I hope you enjoyed it as well, and I look forward to seeing you in many other hands-on labs to come.